The U.S. markets pulled back slightly last week after 3 straight weeks of positive performance. In this week's video, I'll be going over the returns from last week, to spend the majority of my time going over 2 of the major news stories that we're focusing on this week, and Matt will be going over everything you need to know about the election that's just 1 week away. The S&P 500 was down about 0.5% last week, still up over 7% for the year. The Dow Jones was down almost 1% last week, now still floating right around break even on the year, down about 0.7 year to date. But it's also important to note, as we're shooting this video on Monday morning, the volatility in the markets continue as the Dow Jones is down about 2%. The NASDAQ was down over 1% last week, up still 28% for the year. The Russell 2000 was actually positive last week, almost 0.5%, down only 1.7% year to date. Foreign and emerging markets were both positive last week, with foreign markets up about 0.3%, but still down over 6% for the year. Where emerging markets had a very strong week, up over 1.5%, and making a strong end of year push, up over 3% now year to date. There are 2 major things that we're paying attention to this week other than the election, and that's GDP and earnings. Now, third quarter GDP numbers come out this Thursday, and economists are expecting about a 32.5% bounce back in economic growth. This GDP report is extra important as it may be one of the last things that each presidential candidate has to stand on before Election Day next week. If the GDP numbers come back stronger than expected, that would bode well for President Trump, as he can say that everything he's been doing for the economic recovery is working. But if the GDP numbers come back worse than expected, then that would bode well for former Vice President Biden, as he can say that everything that President Trump has been talking about and doing for the economy isn't working and would be null and void. Also, earnings season continues this week, as about 40% of the S&P 500 companies report this week. Now, there's already been 134 companies that have reported, and out of those companies, about 82% of them have beaten estimates by an average of 17%. Now, while these numbers are good on the surface, this doesn't take into effect the fact that a lot of these companies had slashed their earnings estimates due to the pandemic. But when you look at third quarter revenues from 2019 versus the third quarter of 2020, there's forecasted decline of about 3.6% from these companies. And to make the numbers even worse, the year-over-year earnings numbers are forecasted and expected to decline by about 16.5%. So while the economy does seem to be recovering in the short term with strong earnings reports, it's clear that these companies are still suffering from the pandemic and the economic shutdowns based off of their numbers from a year ago.
So I'm sure I don't have to tell you, but we're within a week of the election. And this election is not only important for our country, but also extremely important for the stock market. And if anybody is telling you that they know exactly what's going to happen, they're lying. With all of the different ways of voting and all of the different variables going into this election, it makes it extremely hard to predict. But we've been poring over the data, trying to figure out exactly what's going to happen with the election. And we've put together a model that combines the 2016 and 2008 turnout with the early voting and mail-in voting numbers of the states that are reporting already, and also looked at the voter registration numbers for each state. And we think we have a good idea as to how this election is going to play out. So now let's take a look at the map, and essentially all the states that are already decided are colored in. And Joe Biden currently has the electoral lead of 219 versus President Trump at 163. And there's 156 electoral votes up for grabs. Those states are Arizona, Minnesota, Iowa, Wisconsin and Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, New Hampshire, and 1 electoral vote in Maine. Now, I'm sure there'll be a little bit of an argument that we have Texas going red, as some people think it's going to flip blue, but with the early voting numbers in Texas, the Republicans are actually up about 12 points right now, so I see no way how Texas could possibly flip blue. So now we're looking at a map of all the states added in that we feel are going to lean Republican. That's Arizona, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. And the state that's closest right now is North Carolina. So if our data holds true, this election is going to be decided between 4 states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and here in Pennsylvania. So if you are keeping track of the score, that puts President Trump at 258 versus Joe Biden at 219. So now if we dive into those 4 states, we have Minnesota tilting blue and we have Wisconsin tilting red. And in that scenario, President Trump would hit 269 electoral votes. And essentially, he'll win re-election. In this scenario, even if Joe Biden could flip Michigan and Pennsylvania from red to blue and hold on to New Hampshire, he'll still only be tied with President Trump at 269. And here's what happens if there is a tie. So if there is a tie, the vice president vote goes towards the Senate and the presidential vote goes to the House of Representatives. But both votes are very different. In the Senate, in the vote for the vice president, each person gets 1 vote. And right now, the Republicans control the Senate, so chances are that pick would be Mike Pence. Now let's go over to the House, and the House votes on the president. So how it works is not every representative gets a vote, but each state gets 1 vote. And right now, the Republicans control 26 states, and the Democrats control 23. And Pennsylvania is a dead tie because we have 9 House of Representatives that are Republican and 9 House of Representatives that are Democrat. So if everyone voted along party lines, President Trump would win 26 states and he would have 4 more years of his presidency. Now, we don't really think a tie is going to happen, and I think it's going to be hard for Joe to flip Michigan and Pennsylvania. But any way you slice it, it looks like President Trump's on his way for re-election, but it is 2020 and nothing would surprise me. So as Jared mentioned, we're going to be watching earnings and GDP closely, as GDP is the last economic number to show how we are recovering from the shutdown earlier. And we have the Hunter Biden laptop story, which I really don't want to get into, but it could become a factor. Thanks for watching, and if you like this content, make sure you subscribe to our channel and follow us on Facebook.